The large wooden doors of courtroom 302 swung open as Judge Elaine Washington adjusted her black robe and took her seat at the bench. At 45, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from 15 years of serving justice in the Hamilton County Courthouse. The morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long rectangles across the polished floor as the bailiff called the court to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Elaine Washington. Today's docket included a drug possession case that should have been straightforward. The defendant, a young college student caught with a small amount of marijuana, was hoping for a diversion program rather than jail time. But Officer Richard Mercer was the arresting officer, and Judge Washington had seen his testimony before. As the proceedings began, Judge Washington noticed Officer Mercer's stiff posture and tight jaw. His blue uniform was pressed perfectly, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She had heard whispers about Mercer, how his arrest numbers in predominantly black neighborhoods were unusually high, how defense attorneys groaned when they saw his name on police reports. "Officer Mercer, please state your name and badge number for the record," said the prosecutor, a young woman fresh out of law school. "Richard Mercer, badge 4872 Patrol Division," he replied, his voice clipped and formal. The prosecutor walked him through the details of the arrest. The traffic stop for a broken taillight, the suspicious behavior that led to a search, the discovery of the marijuana. Mercer answered each question with practiced precision, occasionally glancing at Judge Washington with what she could only describe as thinly veiled disdain. When the defense attorney rose for cross-examination, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Lawrence Chen, a public defender known for his thorough questioning, approached the stand. "Officer Mercer, you stated that my client was acting suspiciously. Could you explain exactly what you mean by that?" Mercer shifted in his seat. He was nervous, wouldn't make eye contact, kept looking around like he had something to hide. "Isn't it possible that a young black man might be nervous during a police stop for reasons unrelated to criminal activity?" "Objection," the prosecutor called out. Argumentative, Judge Washington leaned forward. "I'll allow it. The officer can answer." Mercer's eyes narrowed slightly as they locked with hers. "I don't see color when I'm doing my job, Your Honor. I see behavior." The way he said "Your Honor" made the title sound hollow, almost mocking. Judge Washington had heard that tone before, from defendants, from angry family members, even from other officers, but rarely so blatantly from a witness on the stand. "Please just answer the question, officer," she said, keeping her voice level. "Fine. Yes, it's possible. But that's not what was happening here." As the questioning continued, Mercer's responses grew increasingly clipped. When Chen pressed him on the details of the search, pointing out inconsistencies in the police report, Mercer began interrupting. "Officer, please allow Mr. Chen to finish his questions," Judge Washington said. Mercer's jaw tightened. "Sorry, Your Honor. Didn't realize we were bending the rules today." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Washington tapped her gavel once lightly. "Officer Mercer, you will show appropriate respect in my courtroom or face consequences." "Mr. Chen, please continue." Chen pressed further. "Officer, could you explain why your body camera was turned off during the first 3 minutes of this encounter?" "Technical issue," Mercer replied flatly. "Happens sometimes." "Interesting that these technical issues seem to happen frequently in your arrests, particularly with young black men," Chen noted, holding up a folder. "I have documentation of 7 similar incidents in the past year alone." Mercer's face flushed red. "Are you accusing me of something, counselor?" "I'm simply asking about a pattern in your police work." "A pattern?" Mercer's voice rose. "I've been on the force for 12 years. My record speaks for itself." Judge Washington could see where this was heading. "Mr. Chen, please focus your questions on this specific incident." "Yes, Your Honor." Chen nodded. "Officer Mercer, according to your own report, you found the marijuana in the glove compartment. Did my client give you permission to search there?" "He consented to a vehicle search." "Did you inform him of his right to refuse?" "He knew his rights." "That wasn't my question, officer." Mercer glared at Chen, then at Judge Washington. "This is ridiculous. We're treating criminals like victims now?" Judge Washington straightened in her chair. "Officer Mercer, your personal opinions are not relevant here. Please answer the question directly." "No, I didn't specifically tell him he could refuse, but he's been arrested before. He knows how this works." Chen raised his eyebrows. My client's previous record was sealed as a juvenile offense and is not admissible here, as you well know. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Washington leaned forward. Officer Mercer, are you referring to information that has been ruled inadmissible in these proceedings? Mercer's eyes met hers, a challenge in them. I'm just stating facts, Your Honor. Or is that not allowed in your courtroom? The disrespect was palpable. Judge Washington had faced challenging witnesses before, but Mercer's behavior was crossing a line. Still, she remained composed. Officer, you will address this court with proper respect. The rules of evidence exist for a reason, and you are bound by them while testifying here. Mercer shook his head slightly. Of course. Wouldn't want to upset the balance of your courtroom, ma'am. The deliberate switch from Your Honor to ma'am wasn't lost on anyone. The court reporter paused, looking up. The bailiff shifted his stance, moving slightly closer to the witness stand. It's Your Honor, Officer Mercer. Judge Washington corrected, her voice firm, but not raised. And you would do well to remember that, huh? Mercer's smile didn't reach his eyes. Right, Your Honor. My mistake. Chen continued his questioning, but Mercer's answers grew more hostile. When asked about alternative approaches he could have taken during the arrest, Mercer scoffed. Look, some neighborhoods need firm policing. Some people only understand one language. That's just reality. What language are you referring to, officer? Chen asked. Force. Consequences. The language of law enforcement. Or would you prefer I hand out stickers and compliments while drug dealers take over our streets? Judge Washington had heard enough. Officer Mercer, this line of testimony is inappropriate. Please restrict your answers to the facts of the case. Mercer turned to face her directly. With all due respect, Your Honor, I've been on these streets a lot longer than you've been behind that bench. Maybe if more judges understood what we're up against out there. Officer, she cut him off. This is not a forum for your opinions on the justice system. Of course not, he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Wouldn't want reality to interfere with justice. The bailiff stepped forward, but Judge Washington raised her hand slightly. She could handle this. She'd faced worse in her career. Death threats in high-profile cases, hate mail, protesters. One disrespectful officer wasn't going to rattle her. Mr. Chen, do you have further questions? She asked. Just one more, Your Honor, Chen replied. Officer Mercer, did you follow standard department protocol during this arrest? Absolutely. By the book, Mercer answered, his tone suddenly professional again. Then why does the timestamp on your written report show it was filed 3 hours after booking, contrary to department policy requiring immediate filing? Mercer's face darkened. Sometimes paperwork gets delayed. We're not all sitting comfortably in offices all day. Judge Washington noticed several officers in the gallery shifting uncomfortably. This wasn't just about one arrest anymore. This was about how Mercer viewed the entire system. And his place in it, Your Honor, Mercer said suddenly. Turning to her, I've been patient with this line of questioning, but it's clear what's happening here. A good officer is being painted as the bad guy while criminals get coddled. Officer Mercer, Judge Washington said firmly, you are here to testify to facts, not offer commentary. Facts? He said, his voice rising. Here's a fact for you. I put my life on the line every day for 12 years while people in robes and suits second-guess every move we make. The prosecutor stood up. Your Honor, may we take a brief recess? But Mercer wasn't finished. Another fact is that some people get where they are because of what they are, not who they are or what they've earned. The implication hung in the air. Several gasps came from the gallery. Judge Washington felt a cold anger settle in her chest, but her face remained impassive. Officer Mercer, you are in contempt of this court. Her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the room. Mercer stood up from the witness stand. Of course I am. What else would I be in your courtroom? As the bailiff moved toward him, Mercer leaned forward and mumbled something under his breath. Those closest to him, the court reporter, the bailiff, and the first row of the gallery, heard it clearly. A racial slur, followed by, "Thinks she runs things." Judge Washington heard it too. 20 years ago, as a young lawyer, she might have reacted visibly. Now she simply tapped her gavel once. This court will take a 30-minute recess. Officer Mercer, you will remain in the building. We will address your contempt of court when we reconvene. As she rose from the bench, Judge Washington maintained her composure. But inside, she knew this was far from over. Richard Mercer had just made a very serious mistake, and he had no idea what was coming next. The heavy wooden door to Judge Washington's chambers closed with a soft click. She stood for a moment, her back against the door, eyes closed, taking 3 deep breaths, just as her grandmother had taught her long ago. The old woman's voice seemed to whisper in her ear, "They can only take your dignity if you give it away." Judge Washington moved to her desk, her robe swishing around her ankles. The window behind her desk overlooked the courthouse square where protesters often gathered during high-profile cases. Today it was quiet, but she wondered how long that would last. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her judicial assistant, Tina Rodriguez, poked her head in. "Are you okay, Judge?" "That was—" Tina trailed off, searching for the right words. "Unprofessional? Disrespectful? Racist?" Judge Washington supplied, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "All of the above," Tina said, stepping fully into the office and closing the door. "I've already had 3 calls from reporters. Someone in the gallery must have texted them." Judge Washington wasn't surprised. Nothing stayed private in a courtroom these days, even without cameras present. Everyone had a phone, everyone was connected, and a confrontation like this was exactly the kind of thing that spread like wildfire. "I need to see Officer Mercer's personnel file," she said, turning to her computer. "Can you call over to the department and have it sent immediately?" "Already did," Tina said, placing a folder on the desk. "I requested it last week when I saw his name on the witness list. Had a feeling we might need it." This was why Judge Washington valued Tina so highly. In their 5 years working together, Tina had developed an almost uncanny ability to anticipate what would be needed. "You're worth your weight in gold, Tina," Judge Washington said, opening the folder. What she found inside was troubling but not surprising. Officer Richard Mercer had joined the force 12 years ago after a stint in the military. His early years showed a promising officer. Commendations for bravery, positive performance reviews, even a citation for de-escalating a potentially violent domestic situation without anyone getting hurt. But around his 5th year, things began to change. Complaints started appearing. Excessive force, disrespectful language, targeting of minority suspects. None had resulted in formal discipline. Most were marked unfounded or insufficient evidence. In the margins of one complaint, a supervisor had written, "Complainant has prior arrests, credibility issues." Judge Washington flipped through page after page, noting a pattern that became increasingly clear. The complaints against Mercer came predominantly from Black and Hispanic citizens, and they were consistently dismissed without thorough investigation. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a graph in Mercer's arrest statistics. "His arrest rate in predominantly Black neighborhoods is 3 times higher than any other officer in his unit." Tina leaned over to look. "And his use of force incidents are nearly double the department average." Judge Washington turned to the last page, a psychological evaluation from 2 years ago, required after Mercer had discharged his weapon during an arrest. The psychologist had noted concerning rigidity in thinking patterns and possible implicit bias issues, recommending additional training and supervision. There was no record that either had occurred. Her phone buzzed with a text message from the court bailiff. "Video from courtroom is already online." "Going viral?" "Chief Judge called, wants to speak with you ASAP." As if on cue, her office phone rang. Judge Washington picked it up, already knowing who it would be. "Elaine, it's Thomas." Chief Judge Thomas Rivera's normally calm voice sounded strained. "I've just seen the video. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Thomas. It's not the first time I've dealt with disrespect in my courtroom. This is different and you know it," he said. "The racial element makes this a powder keg. The mayor's office is already calling me. They're worried about protests." Judge Washington straightened in her chair. "I'm more concerned about justice than public relations, Thomas." "Of course," he backpedaled quickly. "That's not what I meant. I just want to make sure you have the support you need. The police union is already mobilizing. They're claiming Mercer was provoked and that the defense attorney was on a fishing expedition." "I was there, Thomas. I heard what he said. There's no context that makes it acceptable." A heavy sigh came through the phone. "I know, and I'm behind you 100%. But this is going to get ugly. The union rep is already giving interviews saying Mercer was misheard or misunderstood." Judge Washington's free hand curled into a fist. "Are they calling me a liar?" Not directly. They're saying it was a tense situation and people heard what they expected to hear. Thomas paused. The commissioner is suggesting we might want to recuse yourself from any further proceedings involving Mercer for the appearance of impartiality. Absolutely not, Judge Washington said firmly. That would send exactly the wrong message. He showed contempt in my courtroom. He'll answer for it in my courtroom. After finishing the call, Judge Washington sat back in her chair, scrolling through news alerts on her phone. The story was indeed spreading rapidly. Already there were two competing narratives forming. One casting Mercer as a dedicated officer being persecuted for speaking plainly, the other portraying him as the embodiment of systemic racism in law enforcement. Neither narrative captured the complex reality of what had happened in her courtroom. Neither served justice. A notification popped up. A text from her husband, David. Just saw the news. Do you need me to come down there? She smiled slightly at his protectiveness. David had been her rock through 15 years of marriage, standing by her side through her rise from public defender to prosecutor to judge. He understood better than anyone the pressure she faced as one of the few black women on the bench. I'm fine, she texted back. Just doing my job. We'll tell you everything tonight. Another knock at the door and Bailiff Wilson stepped in. Judge Officer Mercer is waiting in the conference room with his union representative. The prosecutor wants to know if you'd consider resolving the contempt matter privately, without reconvening in open court. Judge Washington considered this. Part of her wanted to make an example of Mercer, to show that such behavior would not be tolerated in any courtroom. But another part, the jurist who believed in fairness above all, knew that a public spectacle might make things worse. Tell them I'll speak with them, but the contempt citation stands, she said. And I want the court reporter present to record everything. The small conference room felt crowded with Officer Mercer, his union representative Jack Patterson, the prosecutor Lynn Winters, defense attorney Lawrence Chen, the court reporter, and Bailiff Wilson all gathered around the table. Judge Washington entered last, still wearing her robe, a signal that this was still an official proceeding despite the change in venue. Officer Mercer looked less confident than he had on the stand. His face was pale and he avoided making eye contact as Judge Washington took her seat. Officer Mercer, she began, her voice level and professional. Do you understand why you've been cited for contempt of court? Before Mercer could answer, Patterson jumped in. Your Honor, Officer Mercer wishes to apologize for any misunderstanding that occurred in the courtroom. He was under considerable stress and... I asked Officer Mercer a question, Judge Washington interrupted, looking directly at the officer, and I expect him to answer for himself. Mercer cleared his throat. I became frustrated during questioning. I spoke out of turn. Is that all you think happened? Judge Washington asked. Mercer shifted in his seat. I was disrespectful to the court and... Judge Washington pressed. Patterson tried to intervene again. Your Honor, there seems to be some confusion about exactly what was said in the heat of the moment. Different people heard different things. There's no confusion, Mr. Patterson, Judge Washington said. The court reporter's transcript is quite clear, as is the courtroom audio. Officer Mercer used a racial slur in my courtroom directed at me specifically. I didn't mean... Mercer began, then stopped himself. You didn't mean what, officer? You didn't mean to say it, or you didn't mean for it to be heard? The room fell silent. Even Patterson seemed at a loss for words. The contempt citation stands, Judge Washington continued. Additionally, I am referring this matter to the Police Standards Commission for review. Your behavior today raises serious questions about your fitness to serve. Patterson found his voice. That's an overreaction, Your Honor. One heated moment shouldn't erase 12 years of service. This isn't about one moment. Mr. Patterson, Judge Washington replied, sliding a copy of Mercer's file across the table. It's about a pattern of behavior that the department has consistently ignored. Officer Mercer's actions today were simply the most public manifestation of issues that should have been addressed long ago. You've been investigating him? Patterson asked, his tone incredulous. I reviewed his file after he showed contempt in my courtroom. That's well within my authority. She turned back to Mercer. You will pay a fine of $5,000, and you are barred from serving as a witness in my courtroom until the Standards Commission completes its review. This is outrageous, Patterson sputtered. We'll appeal. That is your right, Judge Washington acknowledged. just as it was my right to be treated with basic human dignity in my own courtroom. As they filed out, Prosecutor Winters hung back. "Judge, I want you to know that the DA's office does not condone Officer Mercer's behavior. We'll be conducting our own review of cases where he was a key witness." "I appreciate that, Lynn," Judge Washington said. "This isn't about punishing one officer. It's about upholding the integrity of the system we all serve." When everyone had gone, Judge Washington returned to her chambers. Her phone was filled with messages, colleagues offering support, friends checking on her welfare, a few anonymous texts that were less kind. News alerts showed that protests were indeed forming outside the police headquarters. She sank into her chair, suddenly feeling the weight of the day. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The police union would fight back hard. There would be pressure from all sides. Some would call her a hero, others would paint her as an activist judge with an agenda. But as she prepared to return to the courtroom to finish the day's docket, Judge Elaine Washington knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had done what was right. And no matter what came next, that would have to be enough. The next morning, Judge Washington pulled into her reserved parking space at the courthouse to find 2 news vans already set up near the entrance. A reporter spotted her car and immediately headed in her direction, cameraman in tow. She grabbed her briefcase and stepped out, her face a careful mask of professional composure. "Judge Washington, do you have a comment about Officer Mercer's accusations?" The reporter called out, thrusting a microphone toward her. "Accusations?" She hadn't heard of any accusations. "He gave an interview last night claiming you have a history of bias against police officers. He says you targeted him because of a case you handled last year." Judge Washington kept walking, her pace steady. "I don't comment on ongoing legal matters." "Excuse me." Inside the courthouse, the security guards nodded respectfully, but she noticed their expressions were different today. Some sympathetic, others unreadable. As she rode the elevator to her floor, she checked her phone. Dozens of notifications filled the screen, including several messages from David and an email from Chief Judge Rivera marked urgent. Tina was waiting for her, coffee in hand and a worried look on her face. "You've seen the news?" Tina asked, handing her the coffee. "Just getting pieces of it. What's happening?" Tina followed her into the chambers, tablet in hand. "Mercer went on Channel 8 last night. He's claiming you have a vendetta against him because he testified in the Franklin case last year, the one where you ruled that the search was illegal." Judge Washington remembered the case well. A young black man had been pulled over for a traffic violation that escalated into a vehicle search. She had ruled the search unconstitutional based on clear precedent. It had nothing to do with Mercer personally. "That's ridiculous," she said, setting down her coffee. "My ruling was based on established law, not on who testified. He's also saying the courtroom audio was manipulated to make it sound like he used a slur when he actually said something else." Tina handed her the high tablet with the interview queued up. On screen, Mercer sat in what looked like a living room, his wife beside him holding his hand. He wore a casual button-down shirt instead of his uniform, looking more like a concerned father than the angry officer from the courtroom. "I respect Judge Washington," he was saying, his voice earnest, "but she's had it out for me ever since the Franklin case. What happened yesterday was a misunderstanding that's being blown out of proportion for political reasons." The interviewer, a sympathetic-looking man, nodded. "What about the racial slur that was reported?" Mercer shook his head emphatically. "I would never use language like that. What I said was that the court was rigged things. With the acoustics in that courtroom and everyone already tense, I can see how someone might have misheard. But I've served this community for 12 years. I coach Little League. My partner on the force is black. I'm not some kind of racist." Judge Washington muted the video, her stomach nodding. This was a calculated move to shift the narrative, to make her look like the aggressor. "The police union is backing him," Tina said. "They've filed a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Committee, claiming you showed bias and denied him due process." "That's their right," Judge Washington replied, her voice steady despite her rising anger. "The record will speak for itself." Her phone rang, Chief Judge Rivera again. This time she answered. "Thomas, I was just about to call you back. Elaine, we need to talk. The mayor's office is getting involved. They're worried about community relations. The mayor should be worried about a police officer who uses racial slurs in open court," she replied. "I agree," Thomas said quickly. But this is becoming a political firestorm. The union is pushing hard and some city council members are backing them. They're calling for you to recuse yourself from all cases involving the department until this is resolved. Judge Washington felt a flash of anger. So I should step aside because I was the target of racism? What message does that send? I'm on your side, Thomas insisted. But I need to know how you want to handle this. If you fight, it's going to get ugly. They'll dig into your past rulings, your personal life, everything. Let them, she said firmly. I have nothing to hide. After hanging up, Judge Washington sat at her desk thinking through her options. She could take the easy path, recuse herself temporarily, let the ethics review play out quietly, return to the bench when things calmed down. No one would blame her for avoiding a public battle, but something deep inside her rebelled at the thought. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every black judge, lawyer, or defendant who had ever been disrespected in a courtroom. It was about the integrity of the system itself. Her thoughts were interrupted by another knock at the door. It was Bailiff Wilson. Judge, there's someone here to see you. Says it's important. I don't have time for reporters, Frank. It's not a reporter. It's Officer Teresa Alvarez from the 4th Precinct. Says she has information about Mercer. Judge Washington hesitated. Meeting privately with a police officer during this controversy could be seen as inappropriate. But if Alvarez had relevant information, send her in, but stay nearby. Officer Alvarez was a petite woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Despite her small stature, she carried herself with the unmistakable confidence of a veteran officer. Thank you for seeing me, Your Honor, she said, declining the offered seat. I'll be brief. I worked with Mercer for 3 years in the same unit. What happened in your courtroom wasn't a one-time thing or a misunderstanding. He said similar things when he thought only other officers were listening. Judge Washington studied the woman carefully. Why are you telling me this? Because the department is closing ranks around him and it's wrong. Alvarez's jaw tightened. I filed 2 complaints about his conduct toward minority suspects. Both disappeared into the system. Now they're making you out to be the villain and I can't stay silent anymore. You realize coming forward could impact your career? Alvarez nodded grimly. My father was one of the first Hispanic officers in this department. He taught me that the badge means nothing if you don't have integrity behind it. After Alvarez left, promising to provide written documentation of her complaints, Judge Washington faced a decision. The officer's testimony could be crucial, but using it meant bringing Alvarez into the crossfire too. Her contemplation was cut short by a call from David. Have you seen your email? He asked, skipping any greeting. Or the news? I've been in meetings. What now? Someone leaked your address online. There are protesters outside our house. Judge Washington felt a chill. What kind of protesters? The kind with signs saying race traitor and activist judge. The kind who made our neighbor keep Tommy inside instead of letting him wait. For the school bus, Tommy was their neighbor's 10-year-old son who often played with their own children. I'm calling the police, she said. Already did. They sent a car but said they couldn't do much since the protesters are on public property. His voice hardened. One of them was wearing a thin blue line shirt, Elaine. You know what this is? She did know. It was intimidation, plain and simple. Are the kids okay? They're fine. School called and said there were individuals asking questions about them, so they're keeping them inside during recess. David paused. Maybe you should come home. We could go stay with my brother for a few days. The suggestion made her anger flare. I'm not being chased out of my own home, David, and I'm not hiding from bullies. By mid-afternoon, Judge Washington's email inbox had hundreds of messages, some supportive, many filled with vitriol and threats. Her social media accounts, though rarely used, were flooded with comments. Someone had even posted old pictures of her from college at a Black student union protest, with captions suggesting she was anti-police and radical. The court's IT department reported attempted hacks of her work email. Security was increased around her courtroom. 2 of her cases were reassigned to other judges after the lawyers received threats. Through it all, Judge Washington maintained her public composure. She handled her reduced docket with her usual efficiency, though she noticed some attorneys watching her more carefully, perhaps looking for signs of stress or bias. During a brief recess, she met with her own attorney, Patricia Winters. a former prosecutor who specialized in judicial ethics cases. They're trying to drown you in mud, Patricia said bluntly, reviewing the union's complaint. The strategy is to make defending yourself so exhausting and painful that you'll back down. I'm not backing down, Judge Washington replied. Good, because you're in the right. But we need to be smart about this. Patricia laid out a folder of documents. I've reviewed the courtroom audio. It's crystal clear what Mercer said. We also have the court reporter's transcript and statements from 3 people in the gallery who heard it. And Officer Alvarez? Her testimony could be crucial, but using it comes with risks. The department could retaliate against her. Judge Washington nodded. She understands that. She came forward anyway. Then we build the strongest case possible. We file our own complaint against Mercer with the State Law Enforcement Certification Board. We document every threat, every attempt at intimidation, and we find out who else has experienced similar treatment from Mercer. As the meeting concluded, Judge Washington received a text from Tina. Turn on Channel 5 now. She grabbed the remote for the small TV in her office. On screen was a press conference outside the police headquarters. The police commissioner stood at a podium, flanked by several officers including, to her shock, Chief Judge Rivera. The commissioner was speaking. A thorough review of Officer Mercer's record shows a dedicated professional with an exemplary service history. While we respect the judiciary, we cannot stand by while one of our officers is subjected to what appears to be a personal vendetta. The camera panned to show Rivera, nodding in apparent agreement. This city deserves better, the commissioner continued. We call on Judge Washington to recuse herself from all cases involving our officers and to retract her unfounded accusations against Officer Mercer. Judge Washington turned off the TV, a cold rage settling in her chest. So that was how it would be. The system closing ranks, the old boys' network protecting its own. Even Thomas, who had claimed to support her, was publicly siding with the police. Her phone buzzed with another text. This one from an unknown number. We know where your kids go to school. That was the final straw. Threats to her were one thing. Threats to her children crossed every line. She forwarded the message to Patricia and then called David. Pack bags for the kids. We're staying at a hotel tonight. As she ended the call, Judge Washington stared out her office window at the city she had served for 15 years. They thought they could intimidate her into silence. They thought wrong. She picked up her phone again and called Patricia back. Change of plans, she said. We're not just defending anymore. Tomorrow we go on offense. The hotel room felt cramped with all 4 of them there. The children, Michael, 14, and Zoe, 12, sat cross-legged on one of the beds, pretending to watch TV while clearly listening to every word their parents said. Judge Washington paced the small space between the beds and the window, phone pressed to her ear. No, Patricia. I don't want to wait for the ethics committee, she was saying. They're moving too fast. We need to get ahead of this. David sat at the small desk, his laptop open, monitoring news coverage and social media. His usual easy smile was gone, replaced by a tense frown as he scrolled through page after page of commentary. Mom, Michael said during a pause in her call. My friend Tyler texted me. He said there are people on social media saying really bad things about you. Judge Washington ended her call and sat beside her son. I know, honey. Some people are angry about a decision I made at work. But they're lying about you, Zoe said fiercely. Tyler's mom told him you called a police officer a racist name, which is stupid because you would never do that. Judge Washington exchanged a look with David. Their children were old enough to understand what was happening, but too young to be burdened with all the details. The truth will come out, she said, putting an arm around each child. But until then, we need to be extra careful. That's why we're staying here tonight. Are we in danger? Michael asked, his voice small. David moved to sit on the other side of the children. Nobody. We're just being cautious. Sometimes grown-ups get very angry about things, and they say things they shouldn't. We're just giving them time to calm down. After the children finally fell asleep in the room's second bed, Judge Washington and David spoke in hushed tones by the window. The department has issued a formal statement backing Mercer, David said, showing her his laptop. They're calling for a full investigation of judicial bias. And here's their first mistake, Judge Washington replied, reading the statement. They're making specific claims that can be disproven. Look, they say Mercer has no history of racial complaints. That's a lie. Does that matter? They control the narrative right now. Narratives can change. She took the laptop and opened her email, finding the message from Patricia with attachments. Look at what Officer Alvarez sent over. David read through the documents, internal complaint forms, email exchanges, notes from meetings, all showing a pattern of concerns about Mercer that had been systematically buried. There are 5 other officers willing to come forward, Judge Washington continued. They've all witnessed Mercer's behavior firsthand. And Patricia found 3 defense attorneys who filed bar complaints about him in the past 2 years. That's good, but is it enough? David asked, ever the pragmatist. The union has resources, political connections. They can make this drag on for months, which is exactly what they want, to wear me down. She closed the laptop and took her husband's hands. But I keep thinking about what my father used to say about his time on the force. The good cops suffer most from the bad ones because they have to live with the shame. David nodded. Judge Washington's father had been one of the first black police officers in their city, facing discrimination from within the department and suspicion from his own community. He had raised his daughter on stories of both pride and pain from those years. What's the plan then? David asked. Tomorrow we go public. Full transparency. We release the courtroom audio, Mercer's complaint history, and statements from the officers who've come forward. No more letting them control the story. The backlash will be intense. It already is, she said, glancing at their sleeping children. But I didn't become a judge to take the easy path. Morning came too quickly. Judge Washington woke before her alarm, checking her phone to find dozens of messages. One caught her attention from Chief Judge Rivera. Need to speak with you urgently. Please call before you do anything. She slipped out to the hotel hallway to make the call. Thomas, it's Elaine. Thank God, he said, sounding genuinely relieved. Look, I need to explain about yesterday. The commissioner blindsided me. I had no idea they were planning that press conference. They told me it was a community outreach announcement. You stood beside him while he attacked my integrity, Thomas. I know how it looked. I should have walked away once I realized what was happening. He paused. But that's why I'm calling. The commissioner's going to announce a temporary reassignment for Mercer this morning. Desk duty pending investigation. It's their way of backing down without admitting they're wrong. Judge Washington considered this. Why the sudden change? Someone leaked the full personnel file to 3 news outlets last night. The unredacted version with all the complaints. They know they can't keep claiming he has a spotless record. This was news to her. I didn't authorize that leak. I didn't think you did, Thomas said. Word is it came from inside the department. Seems you've got allies there. After ending the call, Judge Washington texted Patricia about this development. The response came quickly, already on it. Check Channel 7 News. Back in the hotel room, she turned on the TV to find a breaking news banner. Exclusive, police cover-up exposed. Officer at center of courtroom controversy has history of racial complaints. On screen, a reporter stood outside the courthouse. Channel 7 has obtained documents showing Officer Richard Mercer, who accused Judge Elaine Washington of bias, has been the subject of at least 15 complaints for racial discrimination and excessive force over his career. Most concerning, department leadership appears to have systematically buried these complaints, some involving serious allegations of misconduct. David came to stand beside her, both of them watching in silence as the story they had planned to break was already unfolding. Did you? He began. No, she said. But someone did. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. Thought you should see this first. Dea Teresa Alvarez. In her email was a video file with a short message. Recorded last year at a retirement party. Mercer didn't know I was still in the break room. Judge Washington plugged in her earbuds and played the video. It showed a group of officers in a station break room. Mercer was among them, talking loudly about a case that had been thrown out by that woman judge who thinks she knows the streets better than we do. His language became increasingly offensive as he described how he handled suspects in certain neighborhoods, culminating in a racist tirade that made Judge Washington's stomach turn. She handed the phone to David, who watched with growing anger. This ends his career, he said when the video finished. If the department does the right thing, she replied. That's still a big if. By the time they checked out of the hotel, the landscape had shifted dramatically. The police commissioner had announced Mercer's reassignment, using carefully diplomatic language about taking all allegations seriously and ensuring full transparency. Online, the tide of public opinion was turning, with many officers and legal professionals posting messages of support for Judge Washington. Her phone rang as they drove home. Patricia again. The Judicial Conduct Committee just issued a statement rejecting the complaint against you, her attorney said. And the State Bar Association is calling for an independent investigation of the department's handling of complaints against Mercer. That's good news, Judge Washington said, feeling the first real relief in days. There's more. 3 other judges have come forward saying they've had similar experiences with Mercer in their courtrooms, though none as severe as yours. And the mayor's office called. They want to meet with you about creating a new Judicial Police Liaison Committee to address these systemic issues. As they pulled into their driveway, Judge Washington was relieved to see the protesters gone. Their neighbor waved from across the street, giving a thumbs up. At the courthouse, Judge Washington was met with a different atmosphere. Security guards nodded respectfully, court staff offered quiet words of support, and even attorneys who had initially kept their distance now approached to express solidarity. In her chambers, Tina had arranged the day's files with her usual efficiency, but added a vase of flowers with a card signed by the entire court staff. "You've got quite a fan club out there," Tina said. "And not just here. My sister works at the 2nd Precinct. She says half the officers there are relieved someone finally stood up to Mercer. Apparently he wasn't very popular with his colleagues either." As Judge Washington settled at her desk, there was a knock at the door. Bailiff Wilson entered with Officer Alvarez. "Sorry to interrupt, Judge, but Officer Alvarez insisted on seeing you." "It's fine, Frank, thank you." Once they were alone, Alvarez got straight to the point. "I wanted you to know, I'm not the only one. There's a group of us, officers who've been documenting Mercer and others like him for years. We call ourselves the Shield of Justice." "That sounds like a superhero team," Judge Washington said with a small smile. "Maybe it does," Alvarez admitted. "But when you wear the badge, you see things that make you choose between staying silent or risking everything. After what happened in your courtroom, more officers are choosing to speak up. That takes courage," Judge Washington acknowledged. "So does what you did," Alvarez replied. "Word is that Mercer's union rep has advised him to resign before the disciplinary hearing. Too much evidence has come to light." After Alvarez left, Judge Washington found herself thinking about the ripple effects of that single moment in her courtroom. One ugly comment had exposed years of institutional failure, but also revealed a current of integrity running through the same system. Her thoughts were interrupted by another visitor, Chief Judge Rivera, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Elaine, I came to apologize properly. I should have stood by you from the beginning." "Yes, you should have," she agreed, not making it easy for him. "The thing is," he continued, "this has exposed some hard truths about how we handle these situations. Not just in the police department, but in the courts too. We've been looking the other way, avoiding conflict, telling ourselves it's about maintaining working relationships. While people like Mercer poison the system," she added. "Exactly." He hesitated. "That's why I'm here. The Judicial Conference is forming a special committee on bias in the courts. They want you to chair it." Judge Washington considered the offer. It was a chance to create real change, to transform a personal attack into systemic reform. But she also recognized the political calculations behind it, the courts wanting to show they were addressing the problem, using her as the public face of the effort. "I'll think about it," she said. "But first I have a docket to clear. People are waiting for their day in court." As she prepared to return to her courtroom, Judge Washington thought about her father, who had faced far worse discrimination, but never lost his belief in justice. She thought about her children, watching to see how she would handle this challenge. And she thought about all the other judges, lawyers, and defendants who faced bias in courtrooms across the country. The system wasn't perfect, far from it. But standing up to injustice, even at personal cost, was how change began. Mercer had never expected her to fight back so effectively. He had underestimated her, as people often underestimated those they looked down upon. That was their mistake. and correcting it, one courtroom, one case, one moment of courage at a time. That was her life's work. 6 weeks had passed since that fateful day in courtroom 302. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Judge Washington's chambers as she reviewed her notes for the upcoming hearing. This wasn't just any hearing. It was the final session of the Police Oversight Board's investigation into Richard Mercer and the department's handling of complaints against him. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Patricia Winters entered carrying a thick folder. The attorney looked tired but satisfied, like a runner nearing the end of a marathon. "The board just received the last set of testimonies," Patricia said, placing the folder on the desk. 23 officers in total have now come forward with accounts of Mercer's misconduct. It's unprecedented. Judge Washington nodded. What had begun as a personal attack had snowballed into the largest internal investigation in the department's history. Officer Alvarez's video had been just the beginning. Once officers saw that speaking up was possible, that there wouldn't be immediate retaliation, the dam had broken. "And Mercer?" she asked, still insisting it's all a conspiracy against him. His attorney tried to get the hearing postponed again, but the board denied it. Patricia shook her head. "He doesn't seem to understand that the evidence against him is overwhelming." Judge Washington had recused herself from any official role in the investigation, knowing her involvement would only give ammunition to those claiming bias. But she had provided her testimony, submitted to hours of questioning, and watched as the truth slowly, painfully emerged. "The hearing starts at 2, Patricia continued. "The board has requested you be present for the findings announcement, though you won't be asked to speak." "I'll be there," Judge Washington assured her. After Patricia left, Judge Washington opened her desk drawer and took out a small leather-bound book, her father's journal from his days on the force. She had been reading it over the past weeks, finding wisdom and strength in his words. One passage in particular had stayed with her. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about healing what's broken. Sometimes the system itself is what needs fixing most. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Just heard from Michael's teacher. He got an A on his essay about moral courage. Wonder where he gets his inspiration from. Love you." The message brought a smile to her face. The past weeks had been difficult for their family. The children had faced questions and comments at school. David had taken a leave of absence from work to handle the media requests and threats that continued to arrive, though with decreasing frequency. Through it all, they had grown closer, having difficult but necessary conversations about race, justice, and standing up for what's right. At noon, Judge Washington received another visitor, Chief Judge Rivera. Their relationship had been strained since his appearance at the commissioner's press conference, though his subsequent public apology had helped. "I wanted to check in before the hearing," he said, declining her offer to sit. "The court administrator tells me you haven't given an answer about chairing the bias committee." "I've been thinking about it," she replied. "I have some conditions." "I assumed you would." A faint smile crossed his face. "Let's hear them." "The committee needs real power, not just to make recommendations, but to implement changes. We need funding for training, for data collection, for independent reviews of complaints." She fixed him with a steady gaze. "And I want judicial performance reviews to include metrics on equal treatment, including my own." Rivera looked surprised. "You're willing to have your own rulings scrutinized that way?" "Absolutely. We all have blind spots, Thomas. The point isn't to be perfect. It's to be accountable." He considered this, then nodded slowly. "It won't be easy to get the old guard to agree to that kind of oversight." "Then they should retire," she said simply. "The public deserves judges who welcome accountability." By the time Judge Washington arrived at City Hall for the hearing, the large conference room was already packed. One side of the room held rows of police officers in uniform, their faces solemn. The other side was filled with community members, activists, and reporters. In the middle sat the 9 members of the Oversight Board, a mix of retired judges, civilian appointees, and former law enforcement officials. Judge Washington took her assigned seat in the front row, aware of the eyes following her movement. She nodded to Officer Alvarez, who sat with a group of officers who had testified. They no longer concealed their support, having formed what the media had dubbed the Integrity Coalition within the department. At the respondents' table sat Richard Mercer, his appearance markedly different from the confident officer who had taken the stand 6 weeks ago. His face was haggard, his posture slumped. Beside him, his union representative looked equally defeated, shuffling papers without really reading them. The board chairperson, a retired state Supreme Court justice named William Chen, called the hearing to order. After 6 weeks of testimony and review of extensive documentation, this board is ready to present its findings in the matter of Officer Richard Mercer. Justice Chen's voice was steady and authoritative. Before I continue, I want to acknowledge the courage of those who came forward, often at personal risk to ensure the integrity of our justice system. He paused, looking directly at Judge Washington, and then at the group of officers who had testified. Our investigation revealed not only the specific misconduct of Officer Mercer, but systemic failures that allowed that misconduct to continue unchecked for years. We found substantial evidence of racial bias, abuse of authority, and filing of false reports. Perhaps most disturbing, we found a pattern of intimidation and retaliation against those who attempted to report these violations. Justice Chen continued, detailing specific incidents and the department's repeated failure to address them. Judge Washington listened carefully, noting that many incidents had occurred in courtrooms. Defendants mistreated, evidence mishandled, testimony falsified. The justice system itself had been compromised. Based on our findings, this board unanimously recommends the immediate termination of Officer Richard Mercer's employment and the revocation of his law enforcement certification. A murmur ran through the room. While the recommendation was expected, hearing it stated officially carried weight. Additionally, Justice Chen continued, we recommend a complete restructuring of the department's Internal Affairs Division, mandatory bias training for all officers, and the creation of an independent civilian review process for all complaints involving potential discrimination or excessive force. Mercer stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is a witch hunt. You've had it in for me from the beginning. You're letting criminals go free to protect your political agenda. His attorney tried to calm him, but Mercer shook off the hand on his arm. You think this is justice? He shouted, pointing at Judge Washington. She's the one who should be investigated. Ask about her activist past, her agenda against police. The room erupted, with officers from both sides standing, voices raised. Justice Chen banged his gavel repeatedly. Officer Mercer, you will be seated or removed from these proceedings. 2 security officers approached Mercer, who finally sat down, still muttering angrily. After order was restored, Justice Chen addressed the room once more. What we witnessed just now reinforces the urgency of our recommendations. This kind of behavior has no place in law enforcement. He shuffled his papers. I will now address our findings regarding departmental leadership. For the next hour, the board outlined accountability measures for supervisors and commanders who had ignored or buried complaints. 4 senior officers were recommended for demotion or early retirement. New reporting systems were proposed, along with whistleblower protections and regular audits of arrest patterns and use of force incidents. As the hearing concluded, reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing. Judge Washington slipped out a side door, not wanting to become the focus of the story. This was about something much larger than her personal experience. Outside, she found Officer Alvarez waiting. I wanted to thank you, Alvarez said simply. For what? You're the one who risked your career. Alvarez shook her head. For showing us it was possible to stand up. For not backing down when it would have been easier to stay quiet. As they talked, more officers joined them, the ones who had testified, who had chosen integrity over the blue wall of silence. Some community activists approached as well, initially wary but willing to engage. Judge Washington watched as tentative conversations began between groups that had viewed each other with suspicion for years. 1 month later, Judge Washington stood in courtroom 302, preparing to address a group of new judges who had requested her guidance. The room had been transformed from a battleground back to a place of justice, but she would never see it quite the same way again. The law is powerful, she told the attentive faces before her, but its power comes from people willing to uphold its highest principles, even when that's difficult. Especially when that's difficult. She glanced down at her father's journal, which she now kept on her bench. A courtroom should be the one place where everyone is truly equal, where your skin color, your wealth, your status outside these walls doesn't determine how you're treated. That's the ideal. And while we haven't fully achieved it, it's our responsibility to move closer to it every day, with every decision we make. Later that afternoon, Judge Washington chaired the first meeting of the Judicial Bias Committee. The agenda was ambitious, reviewing data on sentencing disparities, creating new guidelines for courtroom conduct, establishing mentorship programs for judges from underrepresented backgrounds. As the meeting began, she looked around the table at the diverse faces of judges, attorneys, community representatives, and yes, even police officers. The road ahead would be challenging. Changing entrenched systems always was. There would be resistance and setbacks, criticism from all sides. But something fundamental had shifted. People who had been silent were finding their voices. Accountability was replacing impunity, and in one small corner of the justice system, the ideal of equal treatment under law seemed a little less distant than before. Judge Washington opened her folder and called the meeting to order. The real work was just beginning.